This is a recording from the Congress to Campus conference at Reading Bluecoat School on 2nd March 2015. The conference was sponsored by the Eccles Centre for American Studies at the British Library and the British Association for American Studies, with support from the US Embassy London. This session is entitled God, Government and Good Hair, Personality over Party Politics in US Elections, and the speaker is Dr. Mark Shanahan, with discussion from former members of Congress Claudine, Schneider and Dennis Hertel.
It's interesting that people are talking about backgrounds and how to get into things. I am very old, but I got my PhD last year. I had 25 years plus in journalism and in corporate communications, coming off the back of an English degree at Manchester University. I went on the weakest link, and I won. And I thought I was clever. And I went and did a master's, and then I went on Mastermind and I came last. I'm very glad it's not one of the episodes that you can easily find. But the master's led into a PhD, and while I was doing my PhD, I started teaching. I found I really, really liked it, and I found I was absolutely fascinated by America and American politics. I teach British and American politics now. We do it comparatively. You can take modules in each, or we're actually working on a module at Reading now where we look across different systems of government. I love the American system because it's absolutely mad. It brings in a lot of good aspects. It was trying, when it was framed with the Founding Fathers, to be very different from what had gone before, never to enable dictators to rise. So we get presidents, and we get senators, and we get House representatives, and we get all sorts of other things. So we get all of those wonderful people there. But when you go to the polls, you will see something that the original Founding Fathers didn't think of. They didn't think of parties. They were trying to get away from parties. They were trying to get away from the idea of parties, which were a really European thing. They didn't want it because it would cause conflict. And actually, this was government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's very easy when you start and you've got a small colony, and nowhere is more than about 4 days' ride away from the centre. So if you want to raise an issue, you can do it. You can do it yourself, and then you can head to Washington or wherever it may be and do it. As America spread and it grew, and even with the first 13 states, it was huge. If you wanted to go from South Carolina to Washington, it could be over 500 miles. You can't do that on your own, as your own representative. But one of the Founding Fathers didn't like this idea of factions. Actually, is it going to help society or is it going to hinder it? Is it going to break it up, make things more difficult? Are you actually going to be able to represent other citizens if actually there maybe are other influences on you? If somebody is pulling the party strings, the kind of whipping that we're very used to in party politics over here. But, funny enough, that's how it grew. That's how it developed. But hey, George Washington's not a guy to be sniffed at, and he didn't want parties. So, we have a system that doesn't have parties. It makes very simple elections. And you get election forms like that. So, how many of you will actually be able to vote on May the 7th this year? You're going to vote? Say yes, Mark. Good. You're going to vote. Who are you going to be voting for? I'm not asking for the party. Are you voting for a particular party? Are you voting for the Prime Minister? Do you get to elect the Prime Minister? No. Not under our system. But in the United States, the good people of Washington County, Minnesota, could vote for Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and actually a whole load of other people as well. I've gone on one too far there, because I just realised it's a touch-screen system. Equally, they didn't just vote at the national level. This is national level down here, this is the US Senate, this is the US representatives. Number of candidates there. They're also voting for state offices, because under the way that the government is split between federal offices and between the state, you also have almost a parallel organisation operating at the state level. So you pick your state people who you want to vote for. They also had a constitutional amendment there in Minnesota. They're also voting at county level. And this was the one that really got me, the Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor. How cool would it be to be the Soil and Water District Conservation Supervisor and be on the same ticket, the same ballot paper as Barack Obama? I think that is pretty cool. That's not going to happen over here. But what happens when you vote? Do you vote one party all the way through the line? Probably not. You're going to look at individuals who put themselves in front of you, who have raised their ideas with you, who may be tackling a local issue, who may be coming from a cause area, who may be backed by a group of people who you support, and you might actually go, yeah, I'm going Democrat over here, I'm going Republican over here, and you pick and choose. So actually we don't get how we go back to 2010, and we all agreed with Nick, and the Liberals were going to rule the world over here. Didn't quite happen. But you're more likely to get split ticket voting, you're more likely not to get one party through the line in elections. What makes people interested about elections? How would your interest be raised? What would you look to? So I'm a horrible lecturer, I ask questions as I go through. Parents? Okay, so personal opinions around you. What about when you switch on... Actually, you guys don't watch television, or you don't watch it linearly or sequentially. But when you go and you're really bored in a lesson and you hit Google page 1 and you're going around and you find a politics story, would you look at websites or TV or that kind of stuff? I hope you do. I hope it stimulates you. Is it a new thing? Website's relatively new. What about television? How far do you think that goes back in terms of political coverage? 50s? How about 52? This may or may not work. Who was Ike?
Was it Adolf Eichmann?
Not quite. President Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a hero. Eisenhower won the war, all on his own. Well, not quite. But he was the supreme commander in the European theatre. Ike, nobody knew what his politics were. I'm working on a piece of work at the moment that suggests he may have had it in his mind that he was going to run for president from the end of the war. General history says it's much, much later. He could have been picked by the Democrats in 1948. Eventually, when he does run, he runs as a Republican. And he has a very clever guy working for him who manages a TV campaign and says, this new medium, television, which has just come out, we've already sold 73 million sets in America. 73 million sets, it was brand new. It had only actually been around for about 4 years at the time. The guy realised if we buy advertising spots in all the premier television shows at the time, I Love Lucy, comedy show, and stuff like that, in the gaps, all TV is commercial, we're going to get one over on our political opponents. If this works, and I hope it does, this is the first ever presidential TV ad. Let's see. Oh, I might get there slowly. I might have to talk for a minute and see if we get there. Otherwise, I have to sing it. You don't want to hear me sing it. But something might start going and start moving in a minute. If not, we'll just let it go. Basically, it was I like Ike, I like Ike, I like Ike for president. Good slogan. Kind of sticks. Vice president running with him at the time was a guy called Dick Nixon. They also had a slogan for Dick, which is very similar, but I'm not going to repeat that one. Right, this is not going to work now, so we'll get rid of it. This could blow the presentation sky high, because we move on. It seemed to work for Ike. He's the guy who got the red states. There's a lot of them. It was a fairly sweeping victory. It took 39 states. At that time, there were only 48. 2 states of America don't come on until the end of the 50s. Absolutely slaughtered Adlai Stevenson, who saw no virtue whatsoever in using advertising, in using this kind of television. Ha! It's a fad. No one's going to take it out. We move forward to 1960. It's a more famous one. It's the one that everybody at Reading University, where I am, writes essays about. And the influence of television on campaigning. We have John F. Kennedy, fresh, young, good haircut, smart suit, excellent rhetoric, very good speech writers. Who's standing against Dick Nixon? Dick Nixon has been the vice president for 8 years already. He is well known. Is he particularly liked? He's maybe not quite such a likeable character. He's only actually 4 years older than Kennedy. Dick Nixon decides he's going to campaign in every state. He's going to campaign all across the country. While he's campaigning, he bashes his knee on the door of a car. He ends up in hospital. He loses a lot of weight. He turns up at the first TV debate, the first time ever presidential candidates have got together and have debated the issues. And he turns up in a pale grey suit. Pale grey suit there. He's also looking pale himself. This is a guy who can grow a beard in a day. See this gentleman's beard over here? Dick Nixon can grow that beard between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. He looks stubborn. He looks unshaven. He doesn't look very healthy. He's lost 20 pounds. His suit is hanging off him a little bit. Bad choice of suit. Not least because even though colour television exists at this time, it doesn't exist for live broadcasting. And this is a live debate. Kennedy has been briefed brilliantly. He has makeup. It covers up the sweaty sheen. Dick Nixon doesn't have the makeup. He looks a bit shaded. There is a kind of a myth that says those who watched the television thought that Kennedy won the debate and those who listened to the radio thought that Nixon did. It's a wonderful part of the myth of hindsight because there are actually no firm statistics that show either way. There was a study on the radio. It involved 280 people. I think Professor Davis would probably say that in a country that probably even at that time was 250 million, 200 odd people isn't really a viable sample. But what we have is Kennedy realising that it's not about whistle-stop tours, it's not about going around from state to state anymore. You're going to reach people through the medium they're most comfortable with. You're going to get to them at tea time, on the news, if you have a good thing to say. It's a follow-up picture there that shows by the time the second and third debates came around, Dick Nixon had learnt his lesson. He's using makeup, he's in a dark suit, a dark tie, he's making the right impression. But maybe he had already lost the election then. And the interesting thing too is that when he ran again in 68 and in 72, there are no televised debates. Doesn't want to get burned twice. Of course, today, we have debates for everything. 2012, you've got the Republican primary. That just looks like the worst ever episode of Take Me Out. All you need is just patting the wig in there and we're in. They don't actually look that much better when they get down there. But the one shocking thing I find still is that there is only one woman in that lineup. Michelle Bachmann there. But everybody now is in the starch-pressed white shirt. They're all in the smart tie, they're in the dark suit. And it's about presenting an image. But is it just about presenting an image? Is it the right kind of image? Or is it about getting policy across? And if it's about getting policy across, is it ideological? Is it to do with party? It's an interesting thing. My hypothesis, if you like, is that it's about individuals. I'm tempted to show a bit of video about Rick Perry, but it might not work, so I might just jump on. But essentially, during the questioning, they were each asked how they would address agency. If each of these candidates were elected and became the presidents of the United States, what would they do if they got to Washington? And of course, Rick Perry stands up and says, well, what I need to do is get rid of 3 agencies, 3 big agencies in government, and this one, and then he forgets number 3. And at that moment, Rick Perry is no longer a viable presidential candidate because he is being scrutinised by the courts of television. He's being scrutinised by the nation of his peers who might not actually know that much beyond what they see on television, about his policies. They may not particularly know where he comes from on the spectrum in terms of Republicans. If Attila the Hun is here, then maybe Rick is just a little bit to the right. But all they're seeing is this very, very almost cartoonish image. Someone who flubs their lines on television. He can't remember what he was meant to say. He spent the last 5 years trying to recover from that and may still put himself forward in 2016. But what we get is less about policy and more about a beauty contest. If you've got the good hair, if you've got the good teeth, maybe you're going to attract the money that will enable you to run. Rick is there, of course. Still, I wanted to show this one. We'll see if it works. If not, we will just jump on again. Because there is something else that comes out in American politics that we really don't get over here. America is a far more religious nation than Britain. I am so glad I put so much YouTube in this presentation. It's working so well. Candidates will come out and talk about God. How do candidates who talk about God in Britain tend to get on? Not very well. What do we think about Tony Blair when he started talking about faith? Did that make you think, oh, what a wonderful man Tony Blair is? Absolutely not. For me, it's a little bit creepy. But it's hugely different in the States. Here we go. Can't run that one, so we will move on. Ooh, is it trying to work? Too late now, haven't got time. It's rather different in invoking God. 75% of all Americans claim that they are people of faith. 44% of Americans claim to be Protestant. 24% of all Americans claim to be evangelical Protestant. 24%, 1 in 4. 1 in 4 of the vote. That is a very big constituency that you want to win. Or some people want to win. Some people will go out on a limb to pick up that kind of vote. Does it win in practice? 1980? Quite possibly. Ronald Reagan goes to a conference where he is surrounded by evangelical Christians. It's a bipartisan conference, though. It's not specifically Republican. So he stands there and says, I know this isn't about endorsing me. I know you can't endorse me. But I endorse you. His percentage of the vote among that constituency just went like that, overnight. It was influential, maybe not totally driving the votes for Reagan to win. I think he was always going to win. But it helped his cause very considerably. More recently with George Bush, you have George Bush Jr. Bringing out an agency within Washington about faith affairs. Can't exactly remember the name of it. But then he gets hugely criticised because it's not seen to actually deliver anything. But if you're going to invoke God on your platform for election, maybe carry it through to what you do. There are a lot of politicians, and I say politicians rather than government, people within Washington who will carry their cross with them in the election and then hang it on the door once they get into Washington. Very different from what we have. Why it is also very different is money. $7 billion for the 2012 elections. $7 billion. That would almost pay my salary for a week. In fairyland. We talked about it in the last hour session here. Where does that money come from? Well, due to the Supreme Court, it is now much easier for it to come anonymously or through groups who, again, are not party affiliated. If they decide on a candidate who they would like to win, they can put money, whether it's directly or sort of round the corners, into that campaign to make it happen. If you're in the House of Representatives, how often do you get elected? How often do you have to run for election? Every 10 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years?
2 years.
2 years! Excellent. Give that man Star Baker Award. Every 2 years. So as soon as you get to Washington, having done all of the hard work to raise the money, and if we talk about how much money it is, in the House, to run a winning race, these days, $1.5 million. Does that sound about right? Go to the Senate, $11.5 million. Do you get that? Do I get that if I'm running as a candidate and I walk around and I start canvassing you all individually? Got $11.5 million. I'm not interested in you. Right? So it might be the $20, the $100, the $200 that come in, but it's not going to amount to that much. So you have got to look for big money. That big money might come from lobbying organisations or through lobbying organisations. They might be lobbying for something that is very important in your state. It might be the catfish industry in Louisiana supporting you. Or it could be Walmart behind it, or some big defence contractor. You are responsible to your constituents when you go to Washington, but who's going to be knocking on the door first? People who backed you. So quid pro quo. There is, I want something in return for putting my money in. And by the way, here's a policy that's coming up. I'd like you to take my side on it. So it's quite a balancing act. There is a huge balancing act between what exactly you're there in Washington to do. And increasingly, it's making it harder to drive through big legislation. Because there is so much competition for the share of your brain when you're sitting there, whether as a senator or in the House, and for the share of your voting time, and for the share of your policy making. So we actually get an awful lot of bills supporting National Catfish Day in Louisiana, and increasingly, over the last few rounds of Congress, fewer and fewer big, important laws being passed. On the money side, I mean, would you give any money to these guys? This is the British equivalent here. All lovely chaps, possibly don't have the hair, the teeth, or necessarily got. So what about parties? Parties did have a traditional role. The parties bring together people to achieve control of the government, develop policies favourable to their interests, or the groups that support them, and organise and persuade voters to elect their candidates to office. Fairly standard definition. It very quite possibly comes from Phil Davis's book. It's a great book, McKeever and Davis. Buy it. How important is that now? I would suggest, and my colleagues here may well disagree when we get into the conversation, that it becomes less important, that now it is more and more about the individual and who is backing that individual. That's fun. So let's look at an individual race. My video is not going to work, is it? So I probably am not even going to bother looking at the video there. If you want to get my slides afterwards, you can, and there's hours and hours and hours of rich content behind them. These two guys, good hair, good teeth, nice ties. Running for a race in Massachusetts in the midterm. We have Seth Moulton. Seth over here is the Democrat. You can see the very clear difference and distinction between them with Richard over here, who is the Republican. They just look so obviously different. Immediately, don't they? If I was to say to you one of them was gay, married, a realtor who made his big claim to live on Main Street next door to Mom, politically, who would you expect? Democrat? Right. Close your eyes. No peeping. Put your hand in the air if you think that gay married man lives on Main Street as a Democrat. So see, if you do with your eyes shut, then you're not ridiculed at all. When I tell you just how many of you are wrong. No. Of course he was the Republican. Richard Tisdale. Long-term state politician, been involved in state politics for about 20 years, very much from the moderate end of the Republicans. Seth is action man. He's been a captain who's been to Iraq, he's platoon leader, he's had the Bronze Star and various other awards, which he keeps out of the media. until it suits him just before voting day. It's a cynical view, of course, there, because it's not him who brings it into the public domain, it's the Boston Globe. But I suspect someone tipped off the paper, the Boston Globe. They are very hard to differentiate between. What they both do is a little bit of negative advertising on each other. Moulton talks about Tisei saying he's a state's politician. What's he achieved in 20 years? He's done nothing. If you elect him, you're just electing more of the same. Nothing will change. Professional politician, politics is a dirty word. I'm going to Washington to change things. And funny enough, both in the primary he had to get through and then through Tisei's negative advertising, very much an American concept as well, we get Tisei having a pop at Moulton saying, where's his money coming from? He's raised millions of dollars and he's raised them out of state. How is he going to represent you if all of the money he's raising actually comes from PACs outside the state who are donating, not so that the longshoremen of north of Boston get their rights, but so that what policy he does get to raise in Washington actually represents those big money sources. When it comes down to it, Seth Moulton wins easily, about 12 percentage points ahead of the other guy. But it was an interesting race. It was very interesting. We followed it at Reading University via social media. They tweeted, so we started tweeting to them, and the best thing was they started tweeting back. Little university, thousands of miles away. Why did it matter? Because we asked them some clever questions. And we asked them clever questions that wasn't just from me to you, sending an email, which can be ignored, but by sticking it on their Facebook page, and by sticking it on their Twitter feed, and they actually had to respond. And maybe that's where things are going soon. There's 2 points I'd like to pick up before we go. How do you get elected in America? Good hair, good teeth. Hillary brought a book out last year. Hillary, I think, will be the Democratic presidential candidate. Essentially, she got all of her policy into her book, Hard Choices. If you read it, it's the Hillary Manifesto dressed up in a book about her time as Secretary of State. Very good book. She rated very, very highly when people saw that image. New York Times put out an image like that. That's Hillary working every day, hair down, glasses on. She scored considerably lower on that picture. More candid pictures of just the everyday person rather than the airbrushed person. Chris Christie could be up against her. There's Chris Christie after the hurricane hit the Jersey Shore in 2012 with Obama. Obama is just so cool. He just exudes coolness walking along there. Chris Christie, good politician, had a bit of trouble with the bridge, but not so cool in that picture. Chris is working on it. Chris will never be a thin guy, but has lost over 100 pounds. It matters. Tan suits matter. Don't ever, 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 ever go and address the nation dressed in a tan suit. Barack Obama might have had something really, really, really important to say that day, but the news for the next 2, 3, 4 days was not about what came out of his mouth, but what was hanging off his shoulders. Remember those Republicans in 2012? Dark suits, white shirts, good ties. Bad suits. Oh, hey, he's still the president, he's still cool, he's friends with Jay-Z. Where do we go now? My final point after that. There is a paradigm shift in communication. We've gone an awful long way from I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. We've gone a long way from TV debates where the two finalists, the Republican and the Democrat candidates, stand and are grilled on television for your benefit. What happens in 2008 and 2012 is that Barack Obama wipes the floor on social media with his opponents. But what happens is that we get a very old-style use of social media. It is social media treated like any other communication channel. So the campaign team at the top are going to put out messages and you're going to respond or you're going to spread them around. It's changing. That kind of misses the point of Twitter, of Facebook, of Snapchat, of whatever it may be. Who owns the message on those channels? Come on, first-time voters. You are the digital natives. Us guys, up the front, we've learnt this. This is learnt behaviour. And we kind of bring in what we've done before to how we do it now. Who owns the conversation with Twitter? Developer of Twitter. That would be good. He just owns everything. Probably the world now. He's rich enough. He can probably fund a presidential candidate all on his own. You guys own the message. Should it be, for me, presidential candidate, to be telling you stuff, or should you be raising the conversations, sharing the conversations, asking the questions, making it much more democratised communication? Taking the power of the media out of the hands of the people at the centre and putting it much more in the hands of the electorate. I suspect we'll see a progression into the 2016 election. It may take one or two more rounds before we really switch paradigm for social communication. But the days when you could just go on an advertising spot and talk at people are going. The days when all of you guys are just shouting at the television and it doesn't answer back are going. Now you can change. My last question for you. Come the end of November 2016, who will be president? Could be some of those. No. Any thoughts?
Clinton.
Clinton?
Yeah.
What, Bill's going to make a comeback? That'll be good. Yeah. So Hillary? Anyone else?
Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush? So we could have Bush versus Clinton. Haven't been there before. Actually, I suspect it would be Barack Obama, because he won't actually leave office until January 2017. But that was a really bad joke to finish upon. Thank you for your time. I do weddings, bar mitzvahs, and also politics at Reading. We have some time for questions. Before that, I'd like Claudine and Dennis to come back up. And if there's anything that you've seen on there that you would like to respond to, and should I leave the room now?
No, I thought it was excellent. I'd rather hear from the students. I don't really want to just talk at you, so happy to answer your questions.
Okay, question from Chad.
Yeah, on the subject of social media, as someone uses it as well, being a young person, on our newsfeed we'll constantly get a campaign from someone, and it will just be like an advert. It's just like an advert for a watch or a phone. It's exactly the same. There's no sort of personal aspect to it. And I think the point of social media in this sense, I think the way forward for new candidates is to use it that way, to use it the way it was intended for, to use Twitter for personal reasons, not to say every single thing to be about politics. And it's sort of on that same principle that I think Britain needs to take that model, because we use politics as a boring, for candidates right now, particularly exciting. And I think that the social media is the way forward to show how real these people are. Is that a naive way to look at it, or is that something else?
You said they're not exciting. No, I am absolutely and firmly with you. I'm not sure that political strategists have caught up yet. Political strategists will tend to be of my generation and the generation younger than me, so from Cara's generation then. And we have learned, we haven't grown up with fat thumbs and with a phone actually grafted to our heads. We actually use phones as phones to make calls with voice. Have you ever done that? It's quite good. And send texts and stuff like that. So yeah, is it something that crossed over?
Well, Howard Dean was the first person to actually move on that, with his campaign, and but he didn't take it far enough. And of course, he faltered when he yelled after the Iowa caucus, but he hadn't taken it far enough. So President Obama really has taken it as far as any politician in history, made a major change, and that's how he won the second election, because he was able to pick out, a Democrat in a precinct where there was, 85% Republicans, but he was able to pick out the Democrats through social media, keep them going, throughout the election, and get them to turn out and vote. And that made the difference. Now, in addition to that, the really important thing that no one ever talks about is that he was able to get average people to contribute to his campaign. So he had a janitor, in a Detroit high school giving $10 a month. And you had people who had never been involved in politics whatsoever, because the truth is, nobody writes a check in general, unless they want something. Average citizens don't write and contribute to campaigns, and it's been getting worse in that regard. ever since George Washington first ran for office, when he lost for the House of Delegates, House of Burgess in Virginia, he was outspent. So he made sure that he was never outspent again. And back then he bought more beer and liquor and wine for the voters, and he made sure that he always won. Well, you know, politics has always been that way, and usually the person who, for local office or for Congress or for president, who has the most money wins. That's true. But we have exceptions. We've seen Mr. Cantor in Virginia, who was the majority Republican leader who lost for re-election in his primary overwhelmingly by over 20 points, even though he'd outspent his opponent by 100 to 1 and more. So there's still exceptions, but day in and day out, whoever has the most money wins. So yeah, I think social media is the future. I agree with the professor that the older campaign people haven't spent it. The real problem we haven't talked about today is this idea of raising money. When I ran, I raised $120,000, had to borrow part of that. My opponent spent $500,000, and that was in 1980. By 1990 in Congress, it was $1 million for an open seat. Now it's $20, $40 million. We've had a seat in Michigan, just a congressional House seat for $40 million. Senate races are always in that league of extraordinary amounts of money. The second problem is that even when the Democrats can raise the money, even when they're in the majority, when they're the president and the majority of the House and the Senate and can raise enough money, they obviously don't know how to spend it, because I'll ask any of you to show me one political ad the Democrats have had over the last 4 years that made a difference or even had a message, because in their campaign they had no message at all. I mean, it's not a message when you run for re-election to the United States Senate to say, you know, it's true that I've been here 12 years, 18 years, 6 years, and it's true that I voted 85, 90% with the president, but you know, I don't agree with the president on anything, and I'm not really a Democrat. I'm kind of an independent guy. So re-elect me as a Democrat didn't work, you know. So we have a lot of, because those people have not yet admitted the truth, that people know more today, and they're not going to be relying on the television commercials that they don't even have to watch because they tape their television shows, and they're going to zap through all that, you know. Newspapers don't really exist, so nobody's going to read ads in newspapers or the editorial page, and et cetera, et cetera. So the president's people did show us what you can do with social media, but no one else has yet realized that.
More questions? Comments? Prayer? Verbs? Yeah.
Do you think we place too much emphasis on social media in politics today? Undoubtedly, it has great potential, but at our current situation, do you think we place too much emphasis, too much credit to social media having an impact?
I'll give the, if you like, the academic perspective. I will defer for the practitioner perspective. You're not one homogenous audience. People who don't vote at the moment are young people, whether that's this side of the pond or over in the States. And what candidates, wherever they are, need to realise is that they have to connect with you as young voters, find some common perspective, some area of interest that is of interest to you, and motivate you to do something that is actually really hard, which is to get up, to get down to a polling booth and to demonstrate your right as a citizen. And it becomes harder and harder. The people who vote are old people who maybe do it through a sense of duty or through having always done it. If you're looking at politics, whether it's in the UK or in the US, and you see nothing that you can connect with, why would you bother to vote? So politicians have to find those points of connection. And with younger people at the moment, one of the ways to do that is through social media. I'd much rather it's situations like this, when you see, actually, do you know what, these are real flesh and blood people, not some two-dimensional image that comes through a TV screen. So I think social media is very, very important. I think it will become increasingly important, but it's by no means the be-all and end-all. And those digital agencies who go in and say, whatever the question is, the answer is social media, actually had to wake up to the fact that there are a lot of answers, and that's maybe only one of the questions.
Well, I agree with everything that you said, and I think that it's important to realize that part of the reason that the cost of campaigns have gone up is because those who are giving the money have realized how easy it is to manipulate people in positions of power. And so it's an effort to, number one, buy power, and at the same time it is an effort to have enough money to be in the face of all the voters. Most of the money in campaigns goes to advertising about who you are and what you stand for. And that advertising takes many forms, from social media and having a whole team to figure out how to manipulate social media so that you can reach a multitude of different audiences. And then it goes to the really high-priced media, which is television, where I consider it a form of Chinese brain torture, water torture, because it's so constant and so negative. And the other thing, too, because you pointed out a lot of the different psychological aspects, the visual, I think that all voters should be very cautious about negative advertising and fear tactics, because the human mind moves in one of two ways. You are either motivated by pleasure or motivated by pain. And that is what the advertising industry has understood forever. So if they're advertising a car, well, they sell sex with that. You much sexier if you're driving a cool convertible than if you're driving, a jalopy. And so as a result, that's the pleasure impetus that, hey, I want that car because then I'll be cool. Well, it's the same thing in the political forum, because if they communicate pain or fear, you think, oh my gosh, I better vote for him because he's going to spend more money on defense and he's going to go after ISIS, or she's going to do this or that. So you really do need to be very cautious about being manipulated by the media, and ask yourself, are those people communicating, pleasure or pain?
Yeah, I agree with Claudine, and I think the negative wins. People say they don't like it, but it usually wins. And 90%, she's right, 90%, maybe 95% of the money that's raised goes into TV ads, to buy those ads. And I'll say this, at least in my lifetime, I don't know about advertising before, but in my lifetime, as far as television ads, there has never been an educational political television ad where anybody learned anything, by any candidate, from I Like Ike, when I remember as a 4-year-old forward, that it just doesn't, it's 30 seconds or 60 seconds. What are you going to do, Well, you're mostly going to attack your opponent or latch on to some popular item for just a few seconds. But the other problem is that, audiences like this don't exist. Even in the 90s when I was in Congress, we were running out of groups. Earlier you could go to veterans groups and school groups and, civic groups and the women's university, what was that called?
University women.
University, women's groups and all these different things, but, those have died out. There's a book written about bowling alone. I mean, nobody belongs to anything anymore, so you can't find it. At the end, all I could find were the kids' little league baseball games to go to the crowd. What did that have to do with politics? Nothing. That's where I could find some adults, I actually started taking some candidates to bowling alleys and baseball games just to shake hands, to see people. So that's going to continue to be a problem. Because, and television ads, as I say, people don't watch like they used to, and there's no other media. People don't really read the snail mail they get, and all those advertisements and the rest. So yeah, they're going to have to adopt to social media. I don't think they have. And I think we're going to see all kinds of variations of it in the future. I think politics, do you watch Mad Men, that television show? Even in there they showed that politics is always a step behind advertising or whatever new technique there is in business, but they always do get to it, absorb it. So I think we'll get there, but I don't think we're there yet.
I have a question of the audience. I'd be interested in at least 4 answers. And my question is, I mean from 4 different people. If you had someone, instead of us being Americans, we were British and we were running for public office, what questions would you ask? What do you care about as almost new voters? What would you ask about?
Would you stay in the EU or not?
Excuse me,
Would
Stan?
you stay in the EU or not?
Okay, good. What else would you ask about? Yes?
Student finance, big one. Are you going to cut student finance? So obviously we all want to go to university. It's going to cost us quite a lot of money. We're going to take out a loan. We're going to have to pay it back for a lot of our lives.
Okay.
So that's one of the major issues at the moment.
Great. Yes?
Probably the NHS reform.
Louder, please.
Great NHS, and how you would reform that and how you
Uh-huh.
do stuff like that.
And yes?
Their view on immigration.
All right. Well, why would you ask about immigration? Why do you care about that?
No, it's interesting to see. I don't know how they want they're going to try and cut it down or with the EU and the people coming in. It'd be interesting to see what their opinion would be.
Okay. And the gentleman who asked about would you be part of the EU or not, why do you care about that?
Just the economic future. If we leave the EU, then our economy's going to tumble. So if we leave the EU, I'll probably leave.
So one of the things that I find really interesting among younger voters is that oftentimes they don't understand how decisions being made in the federal government impact their lives. And I mean, whether it's student loans or immigration or the EU or whatever, a real trick to know how to do, I believe, is to connect the dots. And it always surprises me how people ordinarily don't. I mean, I always do, and I thought everybody did, or that everybody's mind worked that way. But I remember campaigning, on behalf of the environment, and people didn't realize that if you dump your waste into the Thames River, and then if you rely on that for, swimming or drinking water or whatever, if it's polluted, it's going to affect your health. And then that, of course, would affect the health budget for the country. Or it would affect the healthcare system, which you as taxpayers are paying into. Same thing with obesity. Should you care? Yes. I mean, if you're your brother's keeper and you have a national health insurance program, you do care whether your neighbor is smoking or, not looking after their health. So it will cost you more, absolutely. So I think that's an important skill that if all of you can learn to not only connect the dots, but articulate that, it's very important, particularly in the political arena. And one of the other little points I'd like to make is that I'm often asked, well, what do you look for when you look at these various candidates who are running? It's really hard because they put out what they want you to see and what they think is important. What I think is most important, because I care about change, and I think that we're very fortunate to be alive during this time period, because I think that we are going through a substantial shift, much like the Renaissance. And a lot of people, don't think of it in those terms, because how many of you are familiar with the tale about the frog in the pot of water that's on the stove? Any of you know this story? Yes, no? Hands up who know the story. Okay, so you put a frog in a pot of water and you turn the heat up and it's swimming around and it doesn't realize that it's getting hotter and hotter and starting to boil. So it doesn't do anything. But if you have a boiling pot and you put a frog in, it'll immediately jump out. That's crisis management. It's aware of the heat. I think most of us are not aware of the shifts and changes that are taking place right now. And what do we need most in terms of our political leaders but someone who is a problem solver? Someone who salivates at the opportunity to figure out how are we going to do immigration differently. And I now live in the state of Colorado, and I'm very proud of the fact that we are progressive and forward-thinking enough that we were looking at all of the Mexicans that were involved in the drug trade that were being killed. and all of the Americans that were being killed in the drug trade. And we decided that we were going to legalize marijuana for medicinal purposes. And then we decided we were going to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. And some people were saying, oh my, you know, how scary. And well, what's so fascinating to me is the medical research industry is now growing, creating more jobs. People are coming to Colorado to study the beneficial health effects of certain aspects and certain compounds found within marijuana. And, you know, I think that we were trying to solve the problem of murder, of money leaving the United States, but in particular leaving Colorado and going to the Mexican warlords. And now we have millions of dollars that are going into our education system just from the sale of marijuana, because the marijuana sales are being taxed. So, you know, it took some real problem solvers to say, we're going to do things differently. We're obviously failing at the so-called war on drugs. How do we address the problem of illegal drugs and having enough money for education? And, you know, people who are problem solvers are the ones who said, yeah, let's try this out. The other way isn't working. Let's do something new.
I want to take that revolution one step further and talk about social media you're talking about. I like the way Professor opened about whether his time was white and gold and black and blue. And you know, I mean, I was watching the Today Show the other morning before I left, and they said 21 million at that point had been watching that dress on media, social media. Well, then they covered it 2 more days as a lead thing, the most important thing in America. And so I wonder if it was like, you know, 100 million people, I'm sure, just, you know. And you know, just think if the revolution takes place where, instead of talking about that dress, that we talked about the ecology and what's happening, you know, with our world. And we talked about what was happening on the community level, and it should be changed, where we could save money, or we could help poor people get a better education. And you know, how could we do that? And how should we get involved? You know, I'm just thinking if we actually did that, instead of talking about whether the dress was where to go. And I believe, because of social media, we have the potential to get there. You know, I mean, I think we're passing out of the phase where people read, you know, an email that says about Congress, for instance, that says, there was a famous email that went around that said that when people are elected to Congress, they automatically get a pension for life, their children go to college for free, they have a limousine that drives them, and they get free residence. And this went around, and I was
And
going
free health care.
Yeah, free health care. So I was in and I heard about this, but I was going to rent a car at the airport in Detroit, and I actually heard a well-educated, well-dressed lady tell her 4 friends about this email she got, and I saw it right there. You know, for me in the old world, you know, old school, I had to actually see it. That here she was, she believed this, and she was telling these people that this was the truth. You know, now in a democracy, you know, Jefferson said, you know, 2 things. You have to have freedom, First Amendment. You have to be able to say whatever you want and write whatever you want. Second thing is you have to have an educated citizenry for democracy too. So, you know, it seems to me that social media has this potential to get beyond the television ads, to get, you know, beyond, you know, all of the misinformation and lack of information, and really have a discussion about, and I guess I would ask you that, you know, what do you think, how do we get to this new world? Would that be a new revolution of information for all of us, rather than the old system, you know, that we had?
Well, if you had something like Vote Smart, how would you get, which has, you know, the facts, and you were voting for the first time, how would you do what Congressman Hertel is saying? How would you get that word out? How would you help disseminate the facts or the truth about a political candidate?
Go on the Facebook page or your account and Slack it to your friends, and that's the constant through.
Yes.
Well, I presume you'd try and target it at a specific group of people.
So it depends what your message was. So if you were going to, let's say, start discussing pensions or something,
Yes.
you may want to go for an advert on Plan to Get Better or something like those lines. Whereas, just for example, if you were going to try and gauge student fees or something, you would try and do it different. On some circumstances, I don't know whether you can say that one specific method is going to incorporate the whole demographic. When
Okay.
I don't think necessarily.
Are there any messages that are big enough for a one-size-fits-all? Politicians use an awful lot of one-size-fits-all. There's a lot of all these little 5-minute programmes in the run-up to the elections over here, or what you get hit with every 15 minutes when there's a break in the TV programme with the same ads coming on again and again and again. Is that poor communication? So you're the generation who are going to change it. So no pressure. We have about 1 minute left. Is there any final killer question that will make us float out of this room and into lunch thinking, wow, that's the best thing I've heard all morning? Again, no pressure. Go for it.
How far do you think this American style kind of image is coming into British politics?
You know, we don't know about British politics, so, you know, really, is it coming into your
President
TV
Blair?
sets?
I'm the man who just wanted to be the president of Europe there, so it helps to just get a leg up in Britain first. Do you see it? I asked you right at the beginning, who do you vote for? Do you vote for the leader? So when you go back to your constituency and prepare for power, are you thinking Ed or David Cameron or Nigel? Please don't say Nigel. That's all politically biased here. Or Natalie Bennett? Or what do you think? Do you think that, or do you just think of the person whose name is in front of you on the form?
Because it is so dangerous. It's you know, I've seen it. We had a mayor of Detroit and a governor in Michigan, and she and he both thought it was a good day if they got on television. Not if they had a vote that they accomplished something. Not even if they got defeated by working for something, but if they got on television. We call them wave set people. They have good hair, they look good, you know. And we found a whole bunch of politicians now found that they don't even have to shake hands with people or meet people. They couldn't get elected in their high school class treasurer. But if they called up strangers and asked for $1,000 per phone call and spent 3 hours a day doing that, they could be a member of Congress. And did that 4 days a week, you know, they could get reelected to Congress. So it's because think of what difference that is then in the time that they spent and the goals they have in their life and what they think is an accomplishment. And so it's very, very dangerous that it's gone this way. Not that I'm sure it hasn't been this way before under, you know, different technologies, you know, when the railroads owned the Congress, for instance, you know, 150 years ago. And that was a new technology, you know, but we've gone through different phases, but I think we certainly are in one now that I do think is spreading to other nations. I think that, you know, very often, you know, whatever is in America does look attractive, and I think television ads have been accepted in nations around the world, and some of our people that run these campaigns go and do consulting in other countries.
Right.
Ed Miliband's chief strategist for this campaign worked for Obama on 2012. I think we're just about at lunch. I would finish by saying, if you want to Google any political ads over the next few days, the best one that I saw for the midterms was by Richard Tisay, who I mentioned earlier on there. It was water lapping on the shore for 30 seconds north of Boston. No commentary whatsoever, just a tagline at the end saying 30 seconds of calm in these months of madness. I thought it was brilliant ads. Unfortunately, we still didn't win. Would you thank the representatives here at the front?